Millionaire came home early. What he discovered shattered his marriage and changed everything. Daniel was a self-made millionaire, a man whose days were packed with meetings, flights, and endless phone calls. His wife, Claire, often complained that he was never home enough. That night, however, a canceled business trip brought him back unexpectedly. He carried roses in one hand, planning to surprise her, but as he opened the front door, he froze. The house was dimly lit. Music played softly from the living room. At first, Daniel smiled, thinking Claire had prepared a romantic evening, but then he heard He set the roses quietly on the table and walked further inside, each step heavy with dread. Peeking around the corner, his heart dropped. Claire wasn't alone. She sat on the couch, leaning far too close to a man Daniel didn't recognize. They laughed, her hand brushing his arm as if it belonged there. Daniel's chest burned. The woman he had sacrificed years for was smiling in ways she hadn't for him in months. The stranger poured her wine. Claire tilted her head, whispering something that made him grin wider. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. He had built an empire, provided her with everything she ever wanted, mansions, cars, vacations. Yet here she was, entertaining another man under his roof, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, he almost stormed in, demanding answers. But instinct told him to wait. He pulled out his phone and silently recorded. If this was what it seemed, he would need proof. Claire's laughter rang like knives, each sound cutting deeper. He stepped back into the shadows, anger boiling into icy determination. The stranger leaned closer, his hand brushing Claire's knee. Daniel's breath caught. She didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled coyly, whispering, "He'll never know." The words shattered Daniel's heart. He had trusted her completely. Every business deal, every sleepless night at the office had been to build a future for them. But she had other plans. Daniel slipped outside, heart pounding. He needed to think. Barging in would only give her excuses. No, he had to be smarter. He dialed his private investigator, a man he had once hired for corporate sabotage cases. "I need you now," Daniel whispered harshly. "At my house, bring a camera. I'll pay triple." Within minutes, headlights appeared in the driveway. The investigator stepped out, equipment in hand. Together, they re-entered silently, setting up cameras through the open back door. Every word, every touch between Claire and the stranger was documented. Daniel watched from the darkened kitchen, his chest aching with each second of betrayal. When the stranger leaned in to kiss her, Daniel turned away, fists trembling. It was one thing to suspect, but seeing it unfold was unbearable. The investigator caught at all the wine, the touches, the kiss. "This is enough," the man whispered. But Daniel shook his head. "No. I want to know everything. Every secret." Hours passed, and Daniel's fury hardened into resolve. He wouldn't confront Claire tonight. No, he would gather. Everything in her lies to see tan then strike when she least expected it. The roses still sat on the hallway table, a cruel reminder of his shattered intention. Tonight, love had died. But tomorrow, justice would be born. The next morning, Claire acted as if nothing had happened. She greeted Daniel with a bright smile, kissing his cheek lightly. "You're home early," she said, feigning surprise. Daniel forced a grin, hiding the storm behind his eyes. He pretended to be tired, excusing himself quickly, but inside he was replaying every detail of the night before. He spent the day reviewing footage with the investigator. Every second confirmed what he already knew. Huai's wife wasn't just unfaithful. She was careless. She had underestimated him, assuming his busy schedule blinded him. Daniel wasn't just a businessman. He was a strategist, and now he planned his most personal negotiation yet. At dinner, Claire chatted about her day, her voice sweet, her laugh hollow. Daniel nodded, letting her believe he was distracted. But his eyes studied her, the way she avoided long eye contact, how she touched her phone constantly. She was nervous, guilty. And she didn't even realize he already knew everything. Later that week, Daniel canceled another trip and stayed home. This time, he watched as Claire slipped into her car late at night, dressed elegantly. She didn't know he had installed GPS tracking. The investigator followed discreetly, sending Daniel updates. The destination, a luxury hotel downtown, room 1503. The evidence was undeniable. Daniel's chest ached with betrayal. It wasn't just about her cheating, it was about how easily she discarded him. He had built a fortune from nothing, dreamed of a family, trusted her with everything, and she repaid him with lies. That night, Daniel sat in his study, pouring himself a glass of whiskey, planning his next move. He contacted his lawyer at dawn. "Prepare the papers," Daniel said coldly. "I want a clean divorce, full control of the assets, and proof of her infidelity on the record." His lawyer, startled by his tone, agreed. With the evidence Daniel possessed, Clary wouldn't stand a chance in court. He was ready to end this, but Daniel wasn't done. He wanted Claire to feel the weight of her choices, not just legally, but emotionally. That evening, he set up a dinner at home, candles and fine wine just like old times. Claire walked in, eyes sparkling with surprise. "This is lovely," she cooed, unaware she was dining at her own downfall. Halfway through the meal, Daniel pulled out his phone and played the recording, the whisper of "he'll never know," followed by the kiss. Claire's face drained of color. She stammered, "Daniel, I can explain," but he raised his hand. "Don't? I gave you everything, and this is what I get in return." Tears streamed down her face as she begged for forgiveness. "It was a mistake, I swear. He means nothing." But Daniel remained calm, his voice steady. "Mistakes don't last weeks in hotel rooms. You made a choice, Claire. And so have I." He slid divorce papers across the table. Her hands shook as she realized it was over. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Clyde sobbed, reaching for him, but Daniel stood, leaving her with nothing but the papers and her guilt. He walked upstairs, his heart broken but resolute. This chapter was ending. The woman he thought he knew was gone, and tomorrow the world would know the truth. The next day, Claire tried to put on a brave face. She followed Daniel around the house, pleading, apologizing, promising she would change. But his silence was louder than any response. He had already moved past emotions now. It was about consequences. He called his lawyer again, setting a court date for the divorce. Behind her tears, Claire's fear grew. She knew what losing Daniel meant to not just the end of their marriage, but the end of the lifestyle she had grown addicted to. The mansion, the cars, the endless vacations, all of it tied to Daniel's empire. Without him, she was nothing. And the panic began to show. In desperation, Claire reached out to the stranger she'd been seeing, but when she asked for support, his tone shifted. He wasn't looking for a future with her. She had only been a thrill, a distraction. Now that her husband knew, he wanted nothing more to do with her. Claire felt the walls closing in. Daniel, meanwhile, focused on his business with renewed energy. Betrayal had cut deep, but it also reminded him of his strength. He had built himself once from nothing, and he could rebuild again. In meetings, his team noticed a sharper, colder edge. Daniel was no longer just a millionaire, he was a man on a mission. The day of court arrived. Claire walked in looking fragile, makeup barely hiding the exhaustion of sleepless nights. Daniel sat across from her, his expression unreadable. The judge reviewed the evidence, the recordings, the hotel receipts, the investigators' photos. Claire's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, realizing the case was lost before it began. The judge ruled swiftly. Daniel retained the estate, the majority of assets, and full control of the empire he had built. Claire was left with almost nothing, just a small settlement to survive. Her betrayal had cost her everything. The courtroom echoed with silence as the reality hit her. Daniel stood tall, unshaken. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Whispers of the scandal had spread, and cameras flashed as Daniel walked to his car. Claire tried to hide behind sunglasses, but the headlines would not be kind. Her reputation, once polished with wealth, was now stained with betrayal. Daniel, however, refused to comment. He didn't need words. Truth spoke for itself. Back home, Daniel entered the mansion alone. The roses he had once bought for Claire were long gone, but their memory haunted him. He poured a glass of wine and sat quietly, reflecting. Pain lingered, but so did freedom. For the first time in years, he felt he could breathe without pretense. In the weeks that followed, Daniel devoted more time to people who truly mattered: his aging mother, his loyal employees, and charitable causes he had once neglected. Betrayal had burned him, but it had also opened his eyes. Life wasn't about empty love. It was about real connections and lasting impact. Claire, meanwhile, moved into a small apartment, far from the luxury she once flaunted. She called Daniel often, begging for another chance, but he never answered. The man who had once given her the world had finally closed the door for good, and she was left alone, haunted by the choices she could never undo. One evening, Daniel attended a charity gala. Surrounded by business leaders and philanthropists, he felt different lighter. For once, he wasn't seen as just a wealthy man, but as someone using his power for good. As he gave a speech, people applauded not his money, but his sincerity. That night, he realized healing had already begun. At the same gala, he met someone unexpected, a woman named Emily, a doctor working with underprivileged children. She wasn't dazzled by his fortune. She was intrigued by his resilience. Their conversation stretched late into the evening, and for the first time since Claire's betrayal, Daniel laughed without bitterness. Meanwhile, Claire spiraled further. The man she cheated with had disappeared. Friends who once envied her lifestyle no longer answered her calls. She was left with bills, shame, and fading beauty. In her loneliness, she realized the depth of her mistake. She had traded diamonds for dust, love for lies. Daniel didn't seek revenge. He had already won by living better, by rising above the ashes of betrayal. While Claire clung to memories of their past, Daniel built a new future. His company thrived, his heart began to trust again, and his life regained meaning. Forgiveness wasn't given, it was earned through moving forward. One rainy afternoon, Claire showed up at the mansion uninvited. Daniel opened the door, shocked to see her standing there, drenched and trembling. "Please, Daniel," she whispered. "I have nothing left." His eyes softened briefly, but his resolve held. "I gave you everything once. You chose to throw it away." He closed the door gently. Inside, Daniel sat quietly, listening to the rain. He felt sorrow not for himself, but for Claire. She had destroyed her own world, but pity wasn't love, and he would never let betrayal back into his life. That moment was the final closure he needed. He was free, completely and utterly free. Months passed and Daniel and Emily grew closer. Their bond wasn't built on wealth or status, but on respect and shared values. For Daniel, it was a revelation true. Love wasn't glamorous or loud. It was steady, honest, and real. His scars remained, but they no longer defined him. Claire vanished from the headlines, her story forgotten by the public. But Daniel never forgot the lesson she left behind. Trust is fragile, love must be cherished, and betrayal comes at the highest price. He vowed never again to mistake charm for loyalty or beauty for character. Looking out over his estate one evening, Daniel felt peace. He had lost a wife, but gained clarity. The empire he built was strong, but his spirit was stronger. And though the pain of betrayal had once nearly broken him, it had ultimately forged him into a man who could stand taller than ever. The millionaire who once came home early and saw his life unravel now stood at the dawn of a new chapter, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a survivor, a builder, and a man who discovered that sometimes the end of one story is simply the beginning of a far greater one.